Welcome to Transform Gov, the digital government podcast. Transform Gov is part of the Ireland eGovernment Awards, and it's brought to you in association with Accenture. I'm Maeve Neefsey, and I'm especially excited today because on this episode we're exploring kind of the heart of digital transformation. And when I say that, what I really mean is people, because people are the ones who make digital transformation really happen. And joining us is Wendy Walsh, Accenture Ireland's Managing Director of Talent and Organisation. Sounds like a big title, but we'll find out more. And who spent nearly 2 decades guiding organisations through complex changes. So I know she's going to share some real gems with us. And as always, we try to be very, very practical. This isn't about theory. It's about you understanding real life examples of how people in the public sector are, overcoming challenges and digitising. So Wendy, you're very, very welcome to Transform Gov.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here with you today.
Good. So listen, we're going to kick off because you've had quite a career with Accenture. You're 18 years and counting now with Accenture. But tell us a bit about how you landed in particular in talent and organisation and what that actually means.
Well, really interestingly, in college, there was a work placement and I got placed in ESB, which was amazing. But Accenture were there deploying a system and I got put on the change team, so helping with training. And I think that just got my passion going for people. So then I applied to the graduate program in Accenture and thankfully I got in. Brilliant. And I've been working in change ever since then. And now I'm honoured to lead our talent and organisation practice for Ireland. And I especially love helping clients on transformation journeys, which are getting more famous now because people really need to transform. So really passionate about people, I think, inside and outside of work. And I think I get energy from people and trying to help them with their problems.
Well, it's interesting because I think where you start your career often means it starts you off somewhere that if you love it, I'm assuming, and you love change. And I started off publishing, but it was very much a startup situation. But we both have something in common. I had my first big piece of work when I started my own business was with ESB.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and they were so good to me. But anyway, that's what we've got that in common. We can swap stories later. Yeah. But you've been part of some very exciting transformations within public sector and bigger organisations and smaller organisations. Can you tell us, who or what kinds of organisations you've worked with?
Yeah, so I'm really privileged to work in the public sector and semi-state, so in healthcare, in transport and in central government, and obviously in utilities as well. So a broad spectrum, but I think all facing very similar problems as well when it comes to people and guiding them through transformations.
So what do you think are the human factors that can be really challenging? Because I think we know that people think of digital transformations to do with technology, but it's not. It's to do with change, and digital is part of that. But where does the human struggle?
Where to start on this? Where to start?
Well, we're in no rush to tell us wherever.
And I'm very passionate about this. I think ultimately when it comes to humans first, there needs to be an investment in understanding what the technology or the digital transformation means for the employee. That means an investment of cash, time, resources, etc. And why that's so important these days is because a few things. First of all, there's change fatigue everywhere. We have never gone through such unprecedented change before. It's not just a system every few years. We're trying to keep up. Companies are trying to keep up. So I do think that change fatigue is a real thing. And we'll probably unpack...
How does change fatigue manifest itself? What happens?
There's no concentration, no engagements. I would put it down to just for the sake of a good story, like a goldfish. You have 7 seconds to capture imagination if you're sending an email, if you're doing a presentation, because people are saturated in communications. And in some organizations, it's all email. And that just does not work anymore because you need to be catering for different workforces and some people mightn't be on their mails. So I do think that change fatigue is real. People are like, do I have to go again? So there is a mindset change required that continuous change is here and it's not going anywhere. These transformations every few years are in the past. It's now ongoing change. And then I would also say, which I know we're going to unpack a little bit later, is leaders have a massive role to play in getting humans bought into change and their employees.
And I suppose in a way, and we can go back to that in a second, I understand leadership is really key. But if I don't know, probably the first transformation anybody went through with technology, we're going to be able to do this, we're going to be able to do this, we're going to be able to do this. And then everybody buys into it. Yeah. And then you can't do this, you can't do this.
Yeah.
But is that the same pattern or have things moved on?
No, I would say that's similarly there, the mistrust. But I do think we are well, I help my clients to do this, which is actually be transparent and honest about what it's going to do. A technology and a transformation needs to be linked to a purpose for anyone to get excited. So even if you're doing something regulatory, if you're actually going to do something that's going to change the way we work, it needs to, relate to people in some way and have that purpose and value towards it for people to get bought in. But I do think people are wading through work with probably fear of change because it hasn't always been done correctly for, reasons like lack of budget or lack of understanding that, sure, this is only a system. Why would it matter to someone? But that system alone could change someone's fundamental workday. And I think that's what I realized when you're dealing with different workers, is that any change could be a massive moment, a panic for them.
Yes. And I presume, look, I know, we both know, transformational projects can fail because of the people issue.
Yeah.
And I don't mean issue as in it's their problem, as in it probably hasn't been managed or well, I know managed is a very broad word.
Yeah.
But have you learned lessons about kind of the do's and don'ts around the people element? And I know you've touched on some of them.
Yeah. Like there's so many. I'm thinking of some clients where we were brought in late in the game where change wasn't on the agenda for deploying a system.
Okay, the name wasn't even there.
It wasn't there. There was no budget allocated to it. Like the basics, classroom-based training. But in this case, the workforce was, some of them were on shift. Some of them were in the office. Some of them were outside the office. So understanding the journey for them to use the technology. So when we got called in, basically, there was no adoption. So the client had spent a lot of money on a system. It was there, but nobody was using it. They didn't see why they had to use it. They didn't see how they were meant to use it. So we came in, and the great thing is people put their hand up and said, okay, we know it's not working. They weren't trying to shove it down on the employees anymore. And I do think that the biggest thing that companies and organizations need to do is understand the people and understand, we call it the moments that matter. What will it mean for these people if you're turning on this system? It could be something, and you know what's really interesting? If you're doing something that impacts someone's, like a HR element, their pay, if you're logging holidays, people will be really fascinated by that because it matters to them. Where if you're putting a system in that's maybe for some financial or something else, for the business, it's not as exciting.
I remember actually a perfect example, which you'll have more, but we were putting in a customer relationship management system and we were speaking to the salespeople and we were saying, we'll be able to track this, we'll be able to see that, we'll be able to, there'll be trends and conversation. And they're looking at us like, we don't care. Like, what's that got to do with us? And you're saying, well, actually, they're absolutely right. Yeah. I've got to make it clear that it's going to make your life easier. Yeah. That's going to give you something that maybe helps you earn more money. And I suppose it's on a level, it's quite complicated though in an organization where there's broad change because you've got to make it relevant to so many different people, right?
Yeah. And that's why the messaging is really important. And a concept that I use a lot is storytelling. We Irish are very good at stories. But you'll remember a story better than you'll remember a PowerPoint presentation with a few graphs. So I think that art of storytelling is becoming to the fore now to get people bought in to understand what we're trying to do. Because you think about it, if you're an employee, even in the public sector, and things are changing so fast, but you're also under pressure. You're working in challenging environments, whether that's in healthcare, really doing tough jobs. Sometimes you just don't have the energy for these changes. And that's why it's really important in the case of that example, when we went into the client to go, well, obviously we're now coming into a busy time. Bad weather impacts a lot of public sector employees in the transport industry. So we can't deploy systems on that if there's snow or those, taking that into consideration, in essence, keeping the employee at the heart of everything. And even if I think back to even 5 years ago, if you were designing a system, they might necessarily have someone like me in the room, like a change practitioner, being the voice of the end user going, well, that interface won't make sense because you have to go back and forward and back and forward. Where now people understand in the design of a system, having someone like me or someone who gets change in can go, well, that will work. Or how about you do this? Or you do know that's a massive pain point for them because they're outdoors, weather or whatever. That design, you save money if you invest early. And in this particular case, the client hadn't invested early in the change, but we came back and we fixed it. And I think that was a massive lesson learned from them. And now they are advocates for change, but I feel like you shouldn't have to go through the war wounds of change not working to invest in it.
So if you were talking to, because with the public sector, one of the biggest challenges is the budgets are limited, and of course, understandably, it's a public purse. But on the other hand, if you were talking to somebody who's about to go through some sort of fairly major digital change or transformation, what would be your argument that it's really important to also invest budget in the people side of things and making sure that people are really bought in and making sure the stories are the right stories to the right part of the organization to make them buy in?
Yeah. There's one thing that some economic research has done recently to say any investment in human capital, like training, should be 9 times the size of tech. That's pretty compelling as a stat to get them on board to listen, I would guess.
There's a reason why it's 9 times. Why?
Yeah. Well,
the loss,
you see
if you don't.
Because people aren't going to use the tools, the ways of working. But I would say leaders need to be that voice of that. And that's why sponsorship is so important of these programs.
It's so interesting because of interviews we've done, for example, with Barry Lowry, who's our government CIO, and quite a few other people, John Barron included, and Maria McCann, all talked about thinking about the customer, if you like.
Yeah.
But actually what you're saying is think about the worker.
Exactly.
Right? Switch it.
Yeah.
If they aren't going to engage, if it's not designed for them, they're not going to use it either. And it's a loss.
And that's a massive trend I'm seeing. People are exceptional at understanding their customers, but they don't have that same level of knowledge on their employees. And that's where the magic happens.
So there's an apathy then a little bit, is there?
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah.
And employees are craving it. And I also think the pandemic has resulted in a higher expectation of customer experience. So we then go to work and we expect that level. Like, it's interestingly, 2 out of 3 just consumers would now rate speed as much as price. They would also see transparency as more important. So even very interestingly, in kind of transport, people now are much happier and satisfied with the service because they see the availability of when's the next bus. Transparency. It could be 20 minutes, but they know, and now they're more satisfied. This is the level of the consumers, what they're expecting, and employees deserve the same. Yeah,
because it's kind of a psychological thing, isn't it?
It is.
If you're open with me and you tell me, look, this is what may or may not work, and this is what it's going to mean for you or not, you then say, well, I can accept it. But if you don't know, people fill the vacuum with rubbish, don't they?
I know. And that's why authentic leadership and transparent comms. And another thing, you can never over-communicate. I've been with clients who are like, we said that now in an all hands, or we've sent that in an email. Nobody would read the email. You cannot over-communicate enough. And they're all simple things that just keep the employee at the heart of it. And I do think the way people are going and the industries are going, hyper-personalization is where it's at.
Well, tell us, what's hyper-personalization? I love it, but tell us about it.
So let me talk about it for a second. I think about a client that would have a few thousand employees. We can't treat them all the same. So what we do is we come up with this thing called personas, where we group them maybe at the highest level to outdoor staff, office-based staff, leaders, for example, at the basic level. And we would then look at what it means for them in relation to change. So if I am delivering change to a field staff versus an office staff, I will deliver a completely different change journey for them. So I will communicate differently to them because they're not on emails, for example, in the field. I'll have to go to the depots or the stations, wherever they are. I will deliver training in a different way. Think of shift workers, that on-demand training that classroom training is gone. It's now on-demand training. I actually worked with a client there and we did podcasts because he knew people were out in the road and they wanted to listen. Leaders, the higher you go, the more time poor they are.
Yes.
So how can you get your message across? And that hyper-personalization comes down to 2 things. First of all, you need to understand them explicitly. You need to go through each person or each team and go, what will this transformation mean for them? What are they going to like? What are the benefits are they going to get? And then develop a journey that goes, how are we going to get them from being aware of this transformation and then to adopting it? And there are all these mini interventions that are going to do it. And behavioral science is a massive role to play in this as well. Like, change management is a science now. Understanding cues and nudges to get people to act and behave in a different way. That's what I mean by personalization, is not treating... I'd be very worried if I went to a client and they showed me their training and comms plan for a large workforce and it was exactly the same.
Yeah.
Because it just won't have the impact.
Yeah. I suppose in a way you're marrying direct insights from the let's call them the employee, right?
Yeah.
Just for simplicity. But also you may be looking at kind of analytics as well that indicates, there's a time of day they seem to respond more.
Exactly.
There's also a kind of language to use or a format, video or podcast, So you're marrying all that, I'm guessing.
For example, I was on another client and the culture was they had this intranet site and a notice board and things went up every day at a certain time. That was the only way we could see the hits of people getting the right hits on the page so that we could communicate because it was in their culture They like this. They've always used this to get key messages out. But that is a really good shout, Maeve. When it comes to the insights, everything's data-driven. So if we develop, a website for a client internally I always recommend that, even in the public sector, to go, if you're on a transformation, have a one-stop shop of information where everyone goes, that it tells you what the transformation's about, what's going to happen, what are the benefits, what will it look like. Update it regularly with frequently asked questions and track hits. And then sometimes you can use data to see what part of the business are looking at it.
Yeah, exactly.
To then see who's most engaged.
Through the power of cloud, data and AI, Accenture is helping the public sector by blending human ingenuity, technology and a delivery-focused culture to turn their ambitions into action. Be ready for any challenge by adopting a continuous reinvention mindset to deliver human-centric services that adapt and grow with your needs. Contact the team at Accenture to find out more.
In terms of leadership, because I think it does, as you know, and I know you're going to tell me how, it plays such a critical role in the success of a transformation program.
Yeah.
And they can't really disengage.
No, they can't.
So is it a challenge though? Is it difficult, do you think, to get leadership engaged when it comes to something? Do you think that belongs to IT and HR? It's nothing to do with me.
If I'm being honest with you, it's one of my biggest challenges. I can design journeys and execute them for lower levels, but in all transformations, we all need leaders to walk the talk. And to do that, they need to be equipped, which takes time. So if I was on a transformation program with a client, the first thing I would have done, I did this recently with a client, is I interviewed a few of them to get their sentiment towards this transformation. Then quite quickly, you can see where the divides are, because I've never done a group of interviews and seen everyone on the same page at the start. And the next thing in our kind of methodology would be a leadership alignment session where you get everyone in the room and we thrash it out.
But don't people hide their real motivations and feelings? How do you get beyond that?
Well, there's two things. First of all, I think face-to-face. There's nothing like face-to-face chats. And also because I wouldn't be a member of the client, I think it's easier to open up to me if I'm here trying to say, I want to do what's best. Can you help? A lot of people are using surveys now, anonymous surveys. Like we're seeing a massive increase in the likes of Menti, which is a tool people can use to share insights. But I do think as a leader, you'd expect them to speak up. And then I would share that typically every transformation has a sponsor. That person is powerful. If they believe in change, I'm extremely happy and relieved, and they're backing it. If they're not a massive advocate for change, it's going to be a little bit harder. But that leadership alignment and then equipping them. So we might talk in a business case in a transformation and go, this is going to give X productivity, X returns. Employees don't care. So what's the language and what's the story that leaders are going out to tell their employees about? And unfortunately, there needs to be a bit more, regulation on it. So sometimes I'd say to sponsors, can we add this as their performance objective? Can they get tracked on it? How are they shown to be accountable for this transformation?
Yeah, why should I do all the extra? It doesn't even count towards my bonus from a recognition. Yeah.
Where is the incentive for them to do it? But I do think that first thing is making sure everyone's on the same page, because then you've got a mini army at the top that are saying the same things. There's nothing worse for an employee. They went into you, Maeve, and you said X and I said Y. It's just confusion. And what's worst is if they don't think the leaders believe in it, they won't.
Now, to be a cynic, right?
Yeah.
You would say that, wouldn't you, as they say?
Yeah.
But is there proof that they're really concentrating on the people aspect and getting the leadership behind you actually delivers better projects, more cost efficient, more profitability?
100%.
Yeah.
Actually, people who have a continuous change capability are twice as likely to outperform others in relation to transformation. So if you invest in change, which has leaders, you're twice as more likely to have a successful transformation.
So how does an organization become a change organization, if you like, that they're comfortable with the continuous need to change, not dramatically change, but constantly, iteratively change?
I think first of all, there needs to be a realization that they're doing it, why they're doing it. So they understand them, their employees, their industries going through a massive change. Therefore, people are power, especially in the health and public sector. They need to be empowered to do this and equipped with them. So I do think that is one real big important part of it.
Yeah. I suppose in a way, digital transformation, has been going on, under different names for a long time.
Yeah.
Not a long time, but certainly the last 15 years.
Yeah.
Okay, proper digital transformation where an organization digitizes its services and its process. But GenAI now has come in, and I think we know it's accelerating it.
It is.
So what excites you about GenAI in terms of transformation and digital transformation?
Yeah. If I'm honest, I was probably skeptical at the very start. but now I'm won over. If you think back to even when electricity came about, that transformed the economies. GenAI is the next electricity that's about to drive innovation. I think what I like about it and what excites me is that it's not a technology that can just be deployed. It has to be used with humans, and it learns from humans. No other machine learns from humans.
You know, it's funny. I mean, if we take it back, right, to kind of more basic level, right, for a second, then we can build from there. I remember when they started televising the GA. You probably don't remember that, but I do. And I know that there was huge concern within GA circles that would completely reduce the number who would attend a live match.
Interesting.
So the ripple effects of things, and of course, it was the opposite. It actually increased attendance.
Because it promoted the sport.
Because everybody could see it, and they had so many more followers, and it reminded them of why they loved it. So I presume that we know the ripple effects. We don't know what they are, but the ripple effects of AI, GenAI particularly, is going to be huge.
It is.
And we probably can't even think of them. And some of them very, 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 very positive, maybe a smaller number negative. But are you beginning to see ways that you didn't expect GenAI to affect, in terms of digital transformation?
Yeah. Well, I think there's so many things because GenAI, if we go back a second, humans outside of work are probably using it
anyway.
Like ChatGPT and, we're now seeing it in Copilot, for example. I'm seeing a massive uptake in Copilot.
Which is embedded into Microsoft, right?
Into Microsoft, yeah. So it really is a colleague and it is a Copilot to help you do things. And I think we're winning people over with understanding the power of it, but there's a massive trust gap. They understand the value of it, but they don't understand it. And that's where leaders come in again, because leaders have to come out and communicate what is GenAI going to mean for our organization instead of getting this fear. Because we did a survey and 60% of people are fearful of it. But yet the execs we interviewed said, we're not concerned about job losses. We see this as augmenting roles as opposed to getting rid of them. So it's all this noise, I think, but until you actually, like most things.
And is there trust issues around what are Copilot doing with the information I'm sharing with them?
Oh, there's trust issues. Yeah, there's trust issues galore, I think, for people, depending on your background. So even we're seeing some of our clients having to get policies for ChatGPT. When can you use ChatGPT for work? When can't you? Then I think for Copilot, there is that fear. Depending on your background and your skill set, this might be a crazy phenomenon for you. And actually, as we were saying earlier on, this wave of GenAI will be the biggest transformation most of us as workers will go through in our lives. So it is a mindset change to get around and go, it's not scary, but this is going to be a journey for people. And typically you need to believe it, try it, and then you believe it again. So it's that experience with it.
Yeah. And I think, as you say, the communication is a constant need, because I know that even today, Gmail have changed their terms and conditions and their privacy. And so I saw so much online about it today because I was curious, and it was saying, oh, look, it means that Gmail are going to be able to read all of your emails and consolidate them and know everything about you. Now, by the way, I have no idea whether that's true or false. Yeah. But the point is, you're having to combat that.
Yeah.
Because people have access to information. They're not living in a box.
Yeah.
And there are going to be things that they worry about.
Exactly.
And I suppose the context has to be set
out front to let people know exactly what it is. Responsible AI is huge. There's actually an EU AI Act now to protect companies. And actually, really interestingly, it's making sure that all companies run AI literacy programs to make sure. So like the government
within the Act, right?
Within the Act, yeah. And actually the program for government calls out AI specifically to say that they want Ireland to be a leader in digital and AI and sees how it's going to transform citizens. So I think when you're kind of, as a person, if you're hearing the government talk about it, if you're seeing your friends use it, and if work are slowly deploying it, it's going to become the new norm. But we are not seeing a lot of people scale GenAI. They're piloting it, like up to 80% could be piloting it. But it's only up to 9% of people we interviewed are actually scaling it. So look, it is a scary thing at the moment, but I think that mindset change and understanding it and exploring it, and I think as we touched on earlier on, it's the people that will turn it on for you.
And I know there's a kind of I don't know if you are interested in what's been going on in the US, but in terms of the regulation for AI, a lot of the Silicon Valley kind of leaders believe that the European model is going to actually completely destroy AI startups. But really, we don't know.
We don't know, but I think at the essence, it's going to protect, because it's going to give regulation and parameters to how we use it. Because let's be honest, we've heard some stories of AI showing bias, not being credible, coming out with that's why it's human and machine.
Yeah.
It's not just AI. You can't just, if you were using ChatGPT, like you would have to second guess it, go, is this actually correct as well? That's why I don't think humans can just leave it up to the machine. It's not built for that. It's built to learn from us.
If we were talking about the leadership part, and I know you touched on it a few minutes ago, but are there things that are different about how you engage with leadership? I know one of them is one-to-one.
Yeah.
But what other ways do you kind of, I suppose, get their buy-in, that they're pivotal to any sort of transformation, and particularly things where you're bringing in GenAI? What have you learned along the journey?
Another thing, it sounds so small, but taking people off-site into a different room, different space in enough time, because you know the way you could go into a client and they'd be on the phone or on the email, taking some time out and really unpacking it. Other public sector love to hear what other people are doing. So inspiration from others is also great, because then someone else has walked in your shoes, that they can share insights and mentoring. I think that's really important. The art of storytelling, so picking up new skills, I think as a leader is really important. And also a leader now, the modern leader of the future is completely different than it was 5 years ago. So when I'm with clients, I explain like the difference between a manager and a leader. Nothing wrong with either, but a leader is really disruptive, constantly upskilling, constantly learning. So there are ways you would treat them like any other persona group, and you'd need to look at the behavioral science. What do we need to trigger them to get them motivated and engaged? We can't just assume because they're a leader, they're going to get engaged. You can't assume anything. So it's how do we tap into them? And then I think it's that personalization. So if there's 7 leaders in a room, all looking after different business functions, what does it mean for them? So what's our transformation going to do for each of them? And personalizing that messaging for them to get excited. So I do think people kind of jump into a transformation.
Tell us some of the things that you've seen that have actually caused failure. You know, in terms of, you don't have to name an organization, but what actually happened? And then how did they come back from that?
Yeah, I do think not understanding the employees has caused a lot. So
what happens when they don't?
So for example, we were going in to deploy some more systems, and we did this workshop with the group of the employees, and there was a lot of resistance. They're like, we haven't even got the first systems nailed down. We don't want other systems. So that lack of understanding how they felt and the sentiment had got someone building a case for transformation when really they had to go back to the basics and go, what are we trying to solve? And that's why I think a lot of organizations are trying to solve a business problem. We need to look at the human element of it. Communication is a massive one. And it's getting more of a problem because it's so hard to communicate with
so many
people.
Channels.
So many channels.
I mean, your phone bings, right?
Yeah.
And you go, is that WhatsApp?
Yeah.
Is that LinkedIn? Is that my email?
Yeah.
Is it the other email I have? So I presume that's replicated over and over, right?
And which do you read? If you who sends your mails? We've seen that. If I, as a consultant, was to post on a client social network, it's not going to have as much traction as a senior person in the organization. So understanding communications and how they are, I think that is another.
So the origination.
Origination is really
person,
important.
If you like.
Yeah. Think about it yourself. If you were to think of some people who are massively influential in your career, you will read their mails. If they send you a mail, you're not going to read a mail from someone. You will, obviously, because you'll want to see what they have to say. You're conscientious, maybe. But still, you want people to pay attention and listen to it. So I would say communication is a massive challenge. And because of the hybrid working, these all hands where you get people face to face, which is great, but doesn't work all the time. And especially when we're seeing in the younger generation who transferred from college to work through the pandemic.
Okay.
There is massive issues where they're living. So they could be living at home still because they haven't made the jump to Dublin, depending on where they're working. So there is a lot of things to consider there, and gathering their sentiment. That sentiment analysis is critical. You may have heard the term business readiness. So if you're turning on a system, you will check, is the business ready? Like basic stuff, like are we tested it? Is the data in place?
How do we set up a password?
Yeah, all that stuff. But there is a human element. And there's one thing I get people to track is what's the sentiment? So we would put metrics in to say for each business unit, we'd need at least 80% people positive. We'd need at least 85% of people trained. These metrics allow us to make sure.
And how do you gather the sentiment from the different cohorts?
I'll tell you one amazing thing to gather sentiment. A champion network.
Okay.
Or influencer
Tell us
group.
more.
So you've heard about influencers that
absolutely.
are online at the moment. They exist in the working world.
Okay.
I've worked with an amazing company that has an unbelievable champion network. I'm talking hundreds. They're dotted all around the business, and their job is to help with transformations. So they will cascade messaging. They will help people in lunch and learns on the technology.
Do they know that that's them?
They have signed up to do it and they get incentivized and rewarded as such. But that power of the influencer group, as we talked about leaders, the next is who are the people you listen to, your peers. And if you see someone who maybe might be a bit resistant to change, singing the song about this amazing system, you will listen more. So the understanding those influencers is another amazing tool, and especially for continuous change.
Mm.
So if you're in an organization and you've got a champion, let's say his name is Pat, Pat will keep you abreast of everything that's going on.
And if Pat says, look, this is good, or there's something interesting coming down the track, you tend to listen to him.
You will listen to Pat.
Yeah. I remember being in digital transformation where they said, find out who the person who's the most cynical and skeptical.
Exactly.
And they're the ones you need to actually get engaged with, because they will, if they like it and they think there's a value, everybody else will have.
If you can win them over.
Brave, you know. Yeah. And so if you were giving advice to a public sector leader who is about to embark or in the middle of a digital transformation project, maybe it's not going as well as they might have thought. What kind of tips would you give?
Well, first of all, I would just say for public sector, based on research we've done, 44% of public sector execs believe that their organization will be transformed with GenAI.
Mm-hmm.
It is, the research is telling us time and time again, it is the sector where it can really have the most amount of transformation. So if I was talking to a leader, I'd say, be ready for GenAI. Don't let it pass you. You've already, it's on a train. We're flying ahead here. Jump on that train. The next thing I would say is make sure you've got a continuous change capability. Now, this is hard because people typically ramp up a change team for a program. I'd be insisting that there's a continuous change team there that are managing change throughout. And the third thing I always say is no matter what you're doing, whether it's a regulatory change, if you're changing the flow of the building, if you're doing anything, keep the end user or the human at the heart of it. If you do that, you can't go too wrong.
You know, this is a perfect segue into part 2, because I've convinced Wendy that she has to come on again because it's so fascinating. And I can't believe we actually reached the end of today in terms of our time. But I think GenAI and its impact on the actual public sector workforce.
Yeah.
So when you say it's going to be a big transformation, let's get into the nitty-gritties of that.
But I'd love to.
I mean, I'm fascinated to see because I think in my mind, I was very kind of worried about how GenAI would affect jobs, but actually I think there's an opportunity there, a big one for public
100%.
sector. So look, don't miss the first one because you're here listening, but don't definitely miss the second one. So all that's left for me now to say is thank you to you very much, Wendy, and we'll be talking to you again in part 2. And thank you for joining us in Transform Gov.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Maeve.
Good. And so I also have to thank the wonderful team that's behind Transform Gov. So our studio manager, that's Peter Rice, our video editor, Neil Horner, sound engineer today is Lee Brennan, but our videographer is Louis Griffin. I got that right. And finally, thank you to South Dublin Podcast Studio. Thank you.